All right, now let's turn to our small business director, Mark Harmsworth. Mark's got a greasy problem that is in Tacoma, where it was actually the headline of the paper. I meant to have it, but I think somebody may have tossed it here, Mark. I had the print edition because right on the front cover was that Tacoma is enforcing the grease disposal issue in kind of a haphazard way where it's not being applied equally for all. But why don't you walk us through when it sounds like grease disposal, it sounds like, you're cooking some bacon, you pour some grease in some tin foil, let it cool, throw it out, or you use it for cooking later or whatever. Not a big deal. Why is this grease collection a big deal?
Well, thanks for having me on, Dave. I would like to say before we go too far into this, I do plan on driving my electric combine harvester down through the McDonald's drive-through. I just think that would make quite the scene and prove the point that Pam is saying that these machines are not supposed to be used for the road. Just occurred to me as I was going through that. But
Well,
yes,
remember the French have been using those to slow down traffic when farmers have gotten pushed too far. There's a lot of farmer protests, and they can definitely do it with large farm equipment like that. So
yeah.
you don't want to push them too far, that's for sure.
That's for sure. So let's talk about Tacoma and Greece. So we're not talking about movies with John Travolta in it either. So what's happening here is the restaurant industry within the city limits of Tacoma. They have, and many restaurants obviously do this, but they have these things grease traps. And as they're washing the dishes, and it really doesn't matter what type of food you're doing, although obviously there are more greasy foods and other types of greasy foods. What's happening is that they'll wash all the pots and pans after cooking, and that grease goes down the drain. And the city of Tacoma has been going through its sewer system, its wastewater system, and discovering large amounts of buildup of grease. And so one of the things you can do is install something called a grease trap. Now, a grease trap is, and there's many ways of doing this. If you own a septic system, you're probably going, yeah, we know what a grease trap is, Mark. It's pretty obvious because you don't want that in your septic system. But think of it as a large plastic tote that sits either in the floor of your restaurant or home or under the sink, and it lets the hot grease kind of distill out between the wastewater and the grease, and you end up with this sludge in this bucket, and then you can take that sludge and throw it in the garbage rather than letting it go down the drain and causing all sorts of problems. Obviously, in a restaurant, this is more acute than it would be at home. Well, the city of Tacoma has decided that when you hit a certain level of meal delivery, which is right now 40 meals per hour, which sounds like a lot, but we'll explore that a little bit more here. You can't use these plastic tote type grease dispensers, and I'm making this a simple concept, but it's a smaller box, obviously. They're made of metal sometimes as well. You can't use those anymore and clean them out on a regular basis, which is totally doable and meets the requirements of the code. Instead, if you serve more than 40 meals per hour, you have to install at least $100,000 tank underground, 500 to 1,000 gallons of sludge, if you like. And you have to put this in and hook this into your system. And so you've got small restaurants. You can imagine the local Chinese restaurant, the takeaway, or the teriyaki joint around the corner, who are being told they can't serve more than 40 meals per hour unless they get one of these tanks. And now I want to throw COVID into this and the whole change in the way that we've had food delivered over the last 3, 4 years. And now with DoorDash and some of these delivery services, it's very easy to exceed that 40 meals per hour. And what you're seeing now is these restaurants are literally being capped in the amount of business that they can do by the city of Tacoma because they can't, one, afford to put 150, 100 to $150,000 tank in the parking lot, and two, it's not their parking lot. Sometimes it can be the building owner, or it could be even the street, and they can't do that. So the city of Tacoma really has put a kibosh on the the whole restaurant and the whole situation here when there's a perfectly acceptable alternate in these totes or these other types of buckets that could be used to get the grease out of the system. We don't want grease going into the sewer, but when the city comes in and does this, it really is destroying the small business market. And as a result, a lot of the businesses in Tacoma are, again, pretty upset about this because it's really inhibiting their ability to generate money off their businesses.
Let me play devil's advocate here, Mark, and say, okay, well, maybe the city's perspective is, well, look, if people were going to use those small totes, then we wouldn't have the grease problem in our sewage system here. So obviously, the small totes aren't working, so we have to mandate this for everybody. A much more, aggressive approach. What would you say?
I would say if that was the important thing, then the city would be actually funding the inspectors needed to go and inspect the totes or these boxes, these grease traps in the first place, but they're not. The enforcement's been incredibly low over the last 5 to 10 years, and they're just not doing it. So either it isn't a problem or the city doesn't care. Either way, why is the city now requiring $100,000, $150,000 tank to go in front of these stores as a result? I mean, if this is a priority, then they should fund it, but it obviously isn't. And the property owners are quite happy to comply with the inspections on these smaller units, but the city's just not doing it anyway. It's just coming in with a big broad brush and saying, if you want to do more than 40 meals per hour, you got to have one of these tanks.
I would think, I mean, heck, the taco truck at the gas station here locally in Tacoma is doing more than 40 meals in an hour. So, I mean, it's going to be, it would be tough for a restaurant to stay in business, except for the smallest of small, and not have moments where they're going to go over 40 an hour, especially
Yeah.
if they have any delivery at all.
Yeah, and you know where this is going to go for the restaurants that do end up putting a tank in, and you can imagine if you're building a brand new restaurant, you may consider this if you're building a large restaurant like a, I don't know, a Red Robin or a Buffalo Wild Wings type scenario. They would put one of these tanks in. But for these small businesses having to retrofit, assuming they can even do it, the cost of that is just going to literally be tagged onto the cost of the food. And
Yeah.
so Tacoma is going to cause the cost of this takeout food or even the food that you eat in the restaurants to go up in price. And it's the same issue that we see a lot with the bureaucratic machine in a lot of these municipalities is they tax a business saying this is good for the environment or this is good for our city, and of course they're not going to tax the individual, but the cost gets passed on because the business owner is not in it to give money to the city for no reason.
There anything applicable to other cities? I mean, what should we be looking at in terms of how does this kind of policy spread, or what should other people from other places be looking at related to this issue or this kind of issue?
Well, we're seeing this a lot at local municipal levels. We've talked about previously about the connection fee that the city of Snohomish slapped on the accessory dwelling units. That was a $20,000 fee, which thankfully the citizens showed up at City Hall and with their pitchforks and said, this is ridiculous. And for those of you who don't know the background on this, the city of Snohomish put a $20,000 connection fee on accessory dwelling units, which are the small little houses that you can build over a garage in the back of your property, affordable housing, which is what we need more of right now. And yet they slapped a huge fee on there rather than letting them connect to the existing water supply of the property that's on the lot, under the guise that this could be sold separately, which it never would be. So these types of regulations where the city's coming in and just not considering the downstream impact of what their fee is actually going to do. These restaurants, the ADU owners, don't have unlimited cash. They can't just drop $20,000 on a connection fee or 100 something thousand dollars on a tank, because that's a huge amount of money for a restaurant that may only be making $500,000 a year in gross revenue. So you start looking at these types of things that the cities are doing. Permitting fees, in Redmond, for example, business license is based on the number of employees you have at your business. Has a detrimental effect to Microsoft that's got tens of thousands of employees within the Redmond city limits. But when you start looking at a small business, it starts adding up incredibly quickly. It's over $100 per license fee. Why is the city doing that? Well, they're doing that to get revenue out of Microsoft, but it's just a money grab at the end of the day. What they should be doing is looking at the fiscal impact and doing it that way if that's the case. And by the way, I'll challenge you. What benefit do you get from that business license in the first place? I would argue almost nothing.
Yeah, that's an interesting point too, which is, just ask. Sometimes people, especially in government, they'll start doing something, and then the reason for doing that is it's always been done, or well, this wouldn't be inspected if we didn't do it. And right now, you're saying, hey, we have this huge problem in our sewer, and it sounds like the city hasn't actually been doing the job of inspecting anyway. So, maybe, maybe they need to hire a private contractor to do the inspections or something. Um, or rethink of how they're doing inspections because it's not working. If you're charging, my guess is when they charge people their permits, one of the reasons for it or reasons given is we need to do these inspections. And if they're not being done, the question is where's that money going? If it's not doing this public service.
And you can self-regulate this too. You could have and I'm not suggesting you could put something else on a small business here, but a small business could submit once a year a certification on their water cleanliness. Maybe there's a little test you can do. There's many ways that they can deal with this because we don't want the grease in the sewer. It does clog things up. It's a
Right.
bad thing. But there's plenty of ways you can do this. Most small business owners are not going to be pouring grease down the drain. They want to succeed in their business, and by doing that, they're not going to succeed.
They
So,
also don't want to have to pay for new pipes or,
uh,
have their floor ripped up to
yeah,
unclog all the pipes that happen.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's all sorts of issues like that. And so there's ways that you can do this without putting an additional burden on the small business, but also not having to go hire a bunch more because I don't advocate for that either. A bunch more bureaucrats. I mean, the state's out of control as it is right now, adding 8,000 employees over the last 3 or 4 years here. So, I mean, that just drives the cost of everything up. So, there's some ways you can do this and still achieve the same goal of cleaner sewers, which sounds like an oxymoron.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for being on the program today. Always appreciate it. And we appreciate you, all of you who tuned in to listen to Washington Policy on the Go. As I said, we'll do some experimenting in the weeks coming up. Might even do a couple of live Washington Policy on the Goes, see if you want to attend. And we'll be sure to publicize those in advance. And then starting January 13th, we have a legislative session coming up. So we'll try and be with you every week to give you the latest on what's happening in Olympia and the perspective of our center directors there as well. So thank you again for being with us, and thank you for supporting Washington Policy Center. I hope you'll share WPC's information with friends, especially our website and our email, our newsletter, where we have links to the key stories every week. It's always free. That's why it just subscribe. And there's numerous places to do so at washingtonpolicy.org. Right at the top, it's sign up now. Any blog you read, there's a place to sign up and get our newsletter for free. So be sure to share that with friends and family. In fact, one of the best ways to have fun at the holidays is bring up policy at the dinner table and say, "Hey, here's this." And you can just tell them if they're upset about politics at the dinner table, say, "Well, if you sign up for this email, then we can cut this conversation short." So now you've got a trick to learn. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you in 2 weeks for Washington Policy Center's Washington Policy on the Go.